Hi everyone, my name is Cindy Wang and I'm a part of the BIPOC working group in the Science Undergraduate Society in the University of British Columbia. Today I happen to have the pleasure to be joined by Mr. Gbolahan Olarewaju, the National Chair of the Black Medical Students Association of Canada, and advocate for people of color and also a second-year medical student in UBC. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Cindy. How you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's midterm season right now, so studying for a midterm on Tuesday, but I'm very happy to talk with you.
It's great. Since this is a relatively short interview, let's just dive right in. So my first question for you would be, in what ways, and both broadly and specifically, have you seen racism manifest in the Canadian medical school curriculum and in our healthcare system?
So yeah, that is a big question. And I think I'll start by saying that medicine has racism built into its very foundations, like right from the start. How a lot of the guidelines have been created, a lot of the research that was done in the past using Black folks, using other people of color to build medical knowledge. Um, there's been some horrendous things. So that it is in the foundation of medicine, and racism itself is as much a scientific construct as it is a social construct. And a lot of people often refer to racism as this social construct all the time. And there is some merit to that, but the reality is it was scientists that first decided to classify humans by skin color. That was where it began. And then from that point on, we started seeing a lot of the societal aspects of it. And then somewhere along the line, medicine just sort of forgot that they had a role in this. And now they're just kind of dragging their feet to catch up to address some of these issues. So that was just the first thing I wanted to say. In terms of how it manifests in medicine, I really could pick any field of medicine and talk about how racism is at play. In medical school, we learn about a lot of diagnostic criteria for different conditions. One that I can think of off the top of my head is kidney failure. So for those who don't know, there's a tool based on a blood test value that is used to basically tell you how well your kidneys are doing. There's an estimate. They call it the estimated glomerular filtration rate. Not super important for this conversation, but in that there is something called the race correction factor. Technically, it's a Black correction factor because the only race that there's anything different for in that calculation is Black people. And this is something that is taught on a regular basis. And I find that a lot of people don't even think about how absurd that sounds. Basically what it says is if a patient is Black, you're supposed to increase this value by a certain amount, like multiply it by a certain number, because they have more creatinine in their blood by virtue of some racist ideology of Black people having more muscle mass. And it's a really, really weird thing. But this is something that is practiced today. So if a doctor sees a patient and the patient is Black based on either self-identifying or the doctor's own perception, they take that lab value and they multiply by a certain number and then decide what the patient's kidney function is. So people learn that, but then at the same time, we're learning that Black folks are at a greater risk of kidney failure. And then because of this correction factor, which overestimates kidney function for Black folks are also less likely to get kidney transplants when they're in end-stage renal failure. So it becomes this vicious cycle, and people are not aware. So that's just an example of how racism plays into medicine in very insidious ways that people aren't aware of. In terms of medical education, of course, there's issues with admissions and with curriculum. So the Black Medical Students Association of Canada has been doing a lot of advocacy work around this specifically. When we think about admissions and trace back to a very important document that sort of framed medical education in North America. It was like it's a seminal document called the Flexner Report back in 1910 that was written essentially this guy went through all the medical schools that were in North America, Canada, and the US, and picked out all the things that were good and talked about the things that were bad, and then created this report that was later used to fund medical schools by some foundations. retitled that. And a lot of people reference this report as this wonderful document that changed medical education. Yet in the very same document, the author said Black folks should be educated in hygiene, not in medicine, because they're a source of contagion to white people. This kind of ideology was built into medicine right from the start. And then in that document as well, the author said that certain schools should be closed, and 5 out of the 7 only schools that had Black learners ended up getting closed. So that's something that this is some of the ways that racism has shown up, and then in the way it's taught in medicine, doctors end up graduating, learning racist medicine without even realizing that they've learned that. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I'm not even talking about anti-Indigenous racism. So as you can see, it does have quite an impact in very, very many ways.
Wow, that's a great answer. Thank you so much for that. And my second question would be systemic racism and medical racism, more specifically, is evidently a very involved issue that will require long-term commitment to dismantle. From your perspective, what are some of the most meaningful ways students can engage with this work?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest mistakes people make when they think about dismantling racism is that they can do so in a reactionary way. And what I mean is conversations about dismantling racism only seem to come up when there's a public incidence of overt racism. But systemic racism is insidious. It runs through every aspect of North American culture and society, and that's a fact. So I think in order to properly engage, as you rightly put it, there needs to be long-term commitment. An analogy I like to use is paying your rent. Putting up, when these things happen, the black square comes up on people's social media. They tweet Black Lives Matter whenever an incident happens. Doing that is like waiting until there's an eviction notice on your door before you pay your rent. Do you get that analogy? Yeah, that's the way I like to think about it. So incidents of racism will happen far less if we as a society are approaching it from an iterative point of view, thinking about our location in society, thinking about the systems that we are a part of on a regular basis, not just when something happens. That's the first thing. So just that paradigm shift needs to happen for those who are thinking about engaging in this work. The next thing is in terms of tangible things that students can do. I think the single most important thing that students can do is educating themselves, because you are learners after all. And I think it's more detrimental to claim to be an ally and try to find solutions to a problem that you don't actually understand, and to just remain silent about it, because oftentimes the people who are given a voice in some of these spaces where they're talking about equity and diversity and all that really don't have an understanding of the issue. They haven't spent time learning about it. They're just sort of thinking about what maybe should be done. And we end up with this cycle of, things don't change, something happens, and then there's more of these panels and discussions and things don't change, and it just keeps going that way. So I think folks should get out of their bubble, first of all, take stock of who's around them, take stock of the people that you surround yourself with. If you look around yourself and you find out that pretty much all the people around you are like you, that's a problem. And that is not necessarily your fault, but you have to ask yourself why that is, because systemic racism has a way of segregating us, right? So you end up living in your own world. You don't actually get to learn about other people's experiences. So when you take stock of that, then you say, okay, I need to actually learn a bit more about this. There's a vast amount of information that's available. Google is right there. You can look things up. You can search, racism. You can search medical racism. You will find some really important things coming out, because there's a vast amount of information available to you. So you can do some reading, you can do some learning, you can do some digging into the history, especially in the fields that you're in, because racism is a massive issue. If you can just focus on the area that you're in and dig deeper into that, you're going to have so much more impact than just talking about racism in a large scheme and saying, oh, this is bad and we need to change it. not one person is going to be able to change racism. Not everybody is Martin Luther King. And hey, so many years later, he hasn't changed. Nothing, not much has changed either, right? So you need to learn. Then you need to arm yourself with that knowledge that you've gained, because when you arm yourself with that knowledge, you're able to educate the people around you. So then we don't have to do all the educating. You find out something new, even if it's just an article that you read. People share so much with social media. Just share it with your circle, because your circle is probably more likely to take issues seriously when it's coming from you than from someone saying racism, racism, racism at them, right? But we're still going to keep saying racism, but like you need to do the work as well and say the same thing, but show it to the people in your circle. And then you need to commit to doing all of this on a regular basis, which is my earlier point. With 24 hours in the day, there's so much time to do things. You can literally take 1 hour of your day and read a couple of chapters of a book. What you prioritize, I think, signals who you are. So if you actually care about it, and there's nothing wrong with saying, you know what, I don't care about. I mean, of course, there's something wrong with it, but like if you actually say you care about it, then you need to do the work that shows that you care about it beyond just calling yourself an ally, because we are the ones who say you are an ally based on what you do. And then specifically for medicine and anti-racism, anti-Black racism in medicine, I think a high yield book that I can offer as like a starting point for anyone who's just like, medical racism, what's that? There's a book called Medical Apartheid by Harriet Washington. And that book just breaks down the history, specifically about anti-Black racism, but you're going to see things coming up in like lung function, in mental health, in kidney function, like all the really gynecology, all the crazy ways that things have been done to Black folks to push medicine forward. That's a good starting place, Medical Apartheid.
Thank you so much for that. That's great insights. And we do respect our time. And would it be okay if we fit in one more question for this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So based on your racial, sexual, and family background, how does it define your identity? And how have they influenced your interactions with your peers, professors, and supervisors? And do they also affect your decision to move to Canada and pursue medicine?
Lots of great questions there. So, like, I'm a queer man. I'm also Black. I'm also an immigrant. I came from Nigeria, and I was born and raised there. So I moved here when I was 16. I would say all my identities have shaped my interaction with the world around me in various ways. And that changes depending on the context that I'm in, the social context that I'm in. So as I said, I was born in Nigeria, where I was a part of a majority. So in Nigeria, I was Nigerian. I was Yoruba. I'm from a specific tribe. That's what I was. Then I moved to Canada, where I'm considered part of a Black minority. So in Canada, my Blackness became the first thing that people noticed about me. And I think that shaped their perceptions and their interactions with me. And that's just how human beings work. They associate what they're seeing with things that they've seen that are similar, whatever else. Unfortunately, that just creates the stereotypes and all the other things that, we talk about. But having not associated myself with Blackness until I moved to Canada, though, I have this interesting, almost outsider perspective, sort of using my childhood experiences growing up as I'm going all sciencey now as a control, comparing what I'm doing, what I'm experiencing in Canada to how I felt when I was growing up, the things that I was seeing, experiencing, the subtle racism or overt racism that I was experiencing. And I think that allowed me to adapt very well to most situations I found myself in. There's a term called code switching, where you essentially, act like the people around you so you don't stick out as much. And it's something that, people probably do every once in a while. On top of that, I adapted to a Canadian accent quite quickly, which probably allowed me to have access to some groups and blend in by virtue of that, which is unfortunate again, but that's code switching. And then as far as my being queer, I'm not the most queer presenting person, so I can't say that it's greatly influenced my professional interactions. But if anything, just like my accent, I think it offered me access to some spaces where I may not have been welcomed purely by being a Black man or an immigrant. So it's a really interesting constellation of identities, and that's what intersectionality is about, right? Different things in different contexts. But of all of them, I would say that my Blackness had the greatest impact um, on me, especially in medical school, where I was the only Black student. As far as career choice for medicine, something I dreamed of doing for a long time. I always wanted to be a physician, but being a part of these various marginalized groups allowed me to witness firsthand how access to healthcare is not very equitable. And as advocacy is something that's always been incorporated into everything that I do, I chose medicine for the tangible impact that I could one day make in the lives of those of us who've been pushed to the margins. And then currently now I'm leading this national organization to do some advocacy work for Black medical students, which has been a learning opportunity and quite exciting. But I'm only doing that for another couple of weeks before I hand it off to somebody else. But it's been quite a ride.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today. And that will be all the questions I have. And
Thanks so much, Cindy.
I should like to thank you on behalf of my BIPOC working group and I believe the interview will be a great inspiration for the Faculty of Science students and beyond. And
awesome.
good luck in your studies and on your
midterm
so next Tuesday. And hopefully we'll have the honor to collaborate with you in the future.
Thanks, Cindy. Take care.